Thank you, thank you. It's really a great pleasure to be here representing my home institution, IE University. Recently named one of the best places in Spain to work if you're LGBT, and many people are in the room who are responsible for making it that way. So it's really a great pleasure to represent IE on this panel of very distinguished speakers. Thank you to the organizers of this event, Zane, and the members of your team. So I want to talk a little bit about, I'm an academic, I'm a scholar of LGBT media. And my work explores the intersections between activist efforts to improve the lives of LGBT people and the intersection of that with attempts by companies and brands to reach LGBT customers, consumers. And last year I published this book, Making Out of Mainstream, GLAAD and the Politics of Respectability, which offers an in-depth, behind-the-scenes look at the inner workings of GLAAD. I was kind of an ethnographer for 18 months at GLAAD in LA and New York in 2000 2001. And the book is based on the 18 months that I spent at GLAAD, observing, attending meetings, going to events, and so on. In a further round of interviews that I conducted with former and current leaders of the organization in 2014, 2015. As you may know, GLAAD was originally an acronym for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, but in 2013, the organization has been referring to itself now without specifying what the letters mean. So now GLAAD stands for itself. It's a brand referring to itself in a certain way. At the time of my fieldwork, GLAAD's mission was to advocate for fair, accurate, and inclusive representations of people and events in the media as a means of eliminating homophobia and discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. Here's a slide showing some of GLAAD's founders. It was founded in New York City in 1985. The founders were writers and academics, veteran activists from the New York Gay Activists Alliance. One of them is getting arrested here in the slide, who saw an urgent need to respond to homophobic media coverage of the gay community, just as AIDS was becoming known in the media. You'll remember that in 1985 was when Rock Hudson died, and suddenly AIDS was everywhere in the media. The organization very quickly grew into a professional media activist organization with close ties to media companies, offices in New York City and Los Angeles, dozens of staff members, and a multi-million-dollar budget. My book tells the story of what happened when corporate executives came to lead the organization to take it to that level of having a multi-million-dollar budget. Showing some video of the 1985 major protests that GLAAD engaged in, the first major action that it took on the 1st of December 1985 in response to the New York Post's homophobic coverage of AIDS. Some 500 to 700 people gathered on a cold and wet Sunday afternoon on the fringes of Lower Manhattan, where the Post's offices were located, brandishing yellow rags to symbolize what they saw as the paper's yellow journalism. They chanted slogans like, "Don't buy the lies." The demonstration mobilized literally hundreds of New Yorkers, garnered substantial media coverage, and led to a meeting with the Post's editors. I began studying GLAAD at a time in 2000-2001 when it was transitioning from being led in large part by activists who had come up through the ranks of the LGBT movement, to being led almost exclusively by people whose experience was in the private sector. On the left is Joan Gary, the executive director at the time, who had been an executive at MTV and Showtime. Steve Spurgeon in the middle was the director of communications. He had been a vice president at Fleishman Hillard, one of the largest PR firms in the world. And the third person on the slide is Scott Seelman, the director of entertainment media, who had been a producer for the celebrity news show Entertainment Tonight. If you've ever been in the US, you've probably seen the show. His immediate predecessor was Chaz Bono, the son of Sonny Bono and Cher, as the entertainment media director. Today, GLAAD is best known in the US and throughout the world for its annual media awards in Los Angeles, which honor the best in LGBT media representation. As you can see, the media awards are a star-studded affair. I was there for Elizabeth Taylor's speech, for example, sponsored by major corporations and full of high-profile celebrities and politicians. The success of the media awards at attracting corporate money is part of a broader phenomenon since the 1990s, as branding took off and brands figured out that they needed to connect with causes that consumers care about. For social movement organizations like GLAAD, it was the perfect intersection of need and opportunity. Organizations needed money for their programs, and brands needed to connect with consumers in new ways. My book asks about some of the implications for LGBT politics and culture of this new way of combining business with philanthropy. The expression "making out," which I use in the book, is rich with connotations. It doesn't just mean kissing, also means kissing. One of the ways to succeed, it also means to succeed or to profit, right, from a given situation. And for GLAAD, as I show in the book, this meant seeking to maximize what could be gained from forging closer relationships with corporate entities, and particularly large media companies. If you Google my book, one of the first things that will come up is a short review published on social media by the prominent New York-based lesbian author and activist Sarah Schulman, who calls it a sizzling expose of GLAAD. She says it's a condemnation of the organization and says, I have the facts, I name names, and the book is damning. And I thought when this came out, this is not the book I wrote. I know that it's impossible to control the book's reception, and I have a great deal of admiration and respect for Sarah Schulman and her work, but I don't think her review accurately describes the book that I wrote. So I wanted to take an opportunity today to talk about what I think is a different view of corporatization. Far from an expose, a condemnation, or an indictment of corporate involvement in activism, my book sets out to show sympathetically, I think, how complicated it was for GLAAD's leaders who came from corporate backgrounds to reconcile their personal good intentions with the economic, professional, organizational, and political pressures they constantly faced. As they found out over the course of my fieldwork, these 18 months that I spent at GLAAD, making social change is a messy business that puts you in conflict and competition with a variety of social actors. When activists and academics speak of corporatization as a problem for activism, they are referring to the fact that, as international relations scholars Louvain and Louvain argue, the influence of corporations on social movements has been spreading since the 1990s. Activist organizations, these scholars write, have increasingly come to look, think, and act like corporations. Not only are more and more corporations financing and partnering with activist groups, but activists are increasingly communicating, arguing, and situating goals within a corporatized frame. Although these authors acknowledge that joining forces has win-win implications for corporations and movement organizations, they argue that a consequence of these alliances is that activists are forced into, quote, moderating goals and methods to pay salaries and run projects. They're hamstrung, essentially. My book clearly shows that this influence is real, and certainly was for GLAAD. But it's also, I think, the story of how social change strategies and tactics continue to evolve despite the pressures of corporatization, often in unexpected ways. When I started my fieldwork, GLAAD's leaders often claimed that confrontational approaches to activism were no longer necessary. By the end of my time there, in just 18 months, though, GLAAD was organizing protests of MTV. And you'll remember that Joan Gary, the executive director at the time, was a former MTV corporate executive. So back to our executives who came to lead GLAAD. Among the factors that complicate the corporatization thesis is that GLAAD's leaders all express ambivalence about their corporate pasts. During an interview in his office in Los Angeles, for example, Scott Sioman told me that despite having landed what he thought was his dream job at Entertainment Tonight, he found the experience of working in the television industry less than fulfilling. He described a conversation he once had with his therapist. And he told me this, and I can report it because it was on the record. He said, "I've got everything I want." He said, "I have 2 houses, 2 cars, and I take August at Martha's Vineyard with my friends. What's missing?" His therapist answered, "I think it's about your work. I mean, how many times can you interview Sharon Stone?" After this conversation, Sioman told me he set out to find more meaningful work. Joan Garry also described her motivation for joining GLAAD as stemming from a desire to put her corporate skills to better uses. During a board meeting, she talked about how she came out in 1980, met her partner in 1981, and was for years a stay-at-home mom. In 1989, she successfully sued the state of New Jersey for the right to legally adopt her partner's children. The following year, she took a job at Showtime Networks, where she stayed until she joined GLAAD in 1998. She told board members at a board meeting that I attended that her last role at Showtime was to promote such pay-per-view events as Mike Tyson's return to boxing after serving time for a rape conviction. As Gary put it to the board members, "I began to feel like I had more to offer." And she did. Steve Spurgeon also cited dissatisfaction with his former corporate life as a major factor in his decision to work for a gay and lesbian organization. Introducing himself to a group of University of California students to whom he was given a talk, he said, "I've been in public relations for 30 years. Before that, I was a school teacher. In fact, all of my experience until about a year ago was in corporate environments, public relations, and agency work. I got involved in gay and lesbian work about a year ago when I just couldn't stand my job any longer. And it wasn't that I disliked the job, it's just that when I turned 50, I decided I think it would be nice if I did something I actually cared about and felt made a difference. I'm working awfully hard, and frankly, I don't really care about United Airlines' fourth quarter earnings anymore. So I thought I'd put my efforts towards something I cared about." The similarity of these narratives across all 3 leaders complicates, I think, this claim among some activists and academics that the US LGBT movement has somehow been the victim of a corporate takeover. New entrants to GLAAD from corporate settings hope to gain personal fulfillment by engaging in socially redeeming work. In this sense, the profound transformations they may have caused within the movement were rooted not in a conscious attempt to take it over, but in a deeply felt need to put their skills to more pro-social uses, and in so doing perhaps compensate for some of the alienation they may have experienced in their corporate jobs. GLAAD provided them with a way to become involved in social change in a way that felt right, comfortable, and appropriate, and gave them a chance to apply their media-related professional skills to something that they deeply cared about. So GLAAD for them stood for a brand of activism with which they as corporate insiders, could live. In the time that remains, I just want to sketch very broadly some of the ways in which GLAAD's corporate leaders changed GLAAD and the way that the LGBT movement in turn also changed them, and the lessons that we might draw from those experiences. One of the first things that Joan Garry did when she became executive director of GLAAD was to rebrand it from the logo that you see on the left there to the new logo on the right. And you'll note you'll note that the logo tells a story about change, where there's a larger circle and a smaller circle coming together. There's an assimilationist reading of that, where this small circle represents the LGBT minority coming to join the majority. And that reading was somewhat controversial while I was doing my fieldwork. But you can see that it's a vast improvement over the previous version, and it led to new possibilities such as cause-related marketing, which was still quite a new thing in 2000, 2001, when Absolut Vodka made this ad using the new logo, incorporating it into the iconic Absolut bottle. And this ad was printed in Entertainment Weekly. It was based on an existing ad from 1990, from the 1990s for Absolut Citron. Then things got complicated. These rebranding efforts and all this corporate money was going on, was coming in. And Laura Schlesinger happened. You may not be familiar with her. Some of you in the room, Shally probably will be. Dr. Laura is a conservative radio talk show host who was given a show on Paramount Television that was meant to compete with Oprah in its day. And they invested $73 million in putting a woman on the air whose views on homosexuality were that it's a biological error, and that the only option for gays and lesbians is to engage in what she called reparative therapy, the idea that you can change your sexual orientation. And suddenly Paramount Television was giving Dr. Laura this platform. She already had 20 million weekly listeners on radio, and so this was a big threat. GLAAD initially took a very conciliatory approach. They tried to meet with her in private, and what happened was that a group of activists organized to put pressure on GLAAD and on Dr. Laura to tone down her homophobic rhetoric. And they organized under the banner of StopDrLaura.com and eventually got GLAAD to engage in protests again when GLAAD hadn't done so for many, many years, finally convincing GLAAD to take up street action again as one of its tactics. When Eminem then released an album, the Marshall Mathers LP, in the year 2000, that included transphobic, lesbophobic, homophobic lyrics, misogynist lyrics. GLAAD again took more aggressive action and actually started to organize protests. Having learned from the success of the Dr. Laura campaign, which eventually led to the show getting canceled when most of its advertisers pulled out, and actually Shally P&G, as you probably know, was one of the key pieces in that particular puzzle. And I just want to leave you with one final story from my fieldwork. During an industry luncheon attended by MTV's head of programming at the time, John Graydon, who also happens to be an openly gay man, Joan Gary, the executive director of GLAAD at the time, said to this luncheon of industry insiders that her biggest surprise and disappointment since becoming GLAAD's executive director was how infrequently gay and lesbian people in positions of power actually use that power. And I think that comment made to a room full of industry insiders speaks volumes about the power to make change by listening to and learning from the outsiders that we might initially disagree with. By the time my study ended, GLAAD's leaders who came from the corporate world were much more willing to use the power and influence they wielded to actually cause change, which is why I think that my book should be read as a testament to the ongoing dynamism and fluidity of the LGBT social movement, not as a condemnation of its corporatization. And on that note, happy Pride.